His father defeated and subjugated by a foreign king, his people enslaved and humiliated, his childhood spent in captivity as a hostage of the very man who had brought such ruin to his nation. The young Thai prince Naresuan nevertheless refused to give in to despair and defeat, instead dedicating his life to undoing the calamity that had befallen his kingdom, no matter the odds, undertaking an incredible journey of self-improvement, resistance, and rebellion that would lead to one of the most legendary showdowns in the history of warfare, as in the midst of a pivotal battle against his Burmese enemies, the man who would become known to history as King Naresuan the Great challenged the Burmese crown prince to single combat. The two royal leaders mounted atop mighty war elephants, engaging in a duel that saw the Thai king slay his hated foe, win the battle, and finally put an end to decades of Burmese aggression and domination. In the 16th century, the area of Southeast Asia, encompassing the modern-day nations of Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia and Laos, was a complex web of rival kingdoms and states engaged in a constant and fierce struggle for survival and supremacy, each king waging war against their neighbours or allying with them depending on their strategic interests at any given moment in time. This constantly shifting tactical and diplomatic backdrop, creating an environment that would see the fortunes of each nation rise and fall on a regular basis, as one kingdom would gain the upper hand over their rivals, only to have the tables turned on them shortly after. It would be into this chaotic and ever-changing political landscape that the young Prince Naresuan was born in 1555 as the son of the reigning king of Siam in modern-day Thailand, his early life dominated by the intense and bitter rivalry between neighbouring Siam and Burma, two of the greatest powers in the region at the time. Instead of enjoying the privileges of being born into a royal family, the young prince would learn from an early age the pain and peril that defeat entailed after his father was forced to surrender to the Burmese king after a prolonged siege of his capital. These painful and early lessons in the reality of leadership and the burden of power shaping the man he would become. In the aftermath of this total Burmese victory, Siamese cities were looted of their treasures, thousands of people were enslaved, and the proud Kingdom of Siam was reduced to a vassal of their hated enemies, forced to provide regular tribute as well as military aid when called upon by their Burmese overlords. To force the Siamese king to stick to this humiliating agreement, the 8-year-old Prince Naresuan and his brother were taken as hostages and sent to live with their captors at the Burmese court, the obvious threat against their lives ensuring that their father the king kept his word and continued to serve as a loyal vassal. Yet rather than slipping into hopelessness and despair, a state of mind that would have been perfectly understandable given his dire circumstances, Prince Naresuan instead committed himself to learning everything he could during his time as a hostage, spending his childhood studying military tactics under Burma's finest generals, and obtaining an education that was usually reserved for only the Burmese elite, the young boy proving to be an able and gifted tactician and commander of men, skills which he was determined to utilize in his future quest to win back Siam's independence. After 6 years in his gilded cage, Naresuan was sent back to Siam to serve as a puppet crown prince, his sister taking his place as a royal hostage and forced to become the Burmese king's second wife, a further humiliation which only strengthened the prince's determination to seek revenge. Forced to serve the very man who had defeated his father, enslaved his people, stolen his childhood, and taken his sister as a wife, Prince Naresuan knew that he had to bide his time and wait for the right chance to strike back, and so when the Burmese king called upon his Siamese vassals to assist his invasion of Cambodia, Prince Naresuan had no choice but to answer the call, well aware that he was not yet powerful enough to refuse and enter open rebellion. At just 16 years of age, the Siamese crown prince marched to war for the first time, quickly impressing the Burmese with his military acumen and bravery, his name becoming well known in both Siam and Burma thanks to his daring and heroic actions during an attack on a Cambodian fortress, where he's said to have climbed the sheer face of a cliff, entered the castle undetected and killed all of the Cambodian soldiers inside before opening the gates for the besieging Burmese soldiers. With his fame and popularity rising, the talented Prince Naresuan was fast becoming a serious rival and potential threat to the Burmese king, one that could no longer be tolerated and allowed to flourish. A plot was hatched to have Prince Naresuan eliminated. However, before the assassins could complete their task, the prince was made aware of the threat against his life and managed to escape back to the Thai capital, where he promptly renounced his obligations as a vassal and declared independence. After suffering years of oppression and humiliation as subjects of Burma, the Thai people eagerly rallied behind their prince, hungry for the chance to regain their freedom and forge their own path. Over the next 6 years, in a series of brilliant military campaigns, Prince Naresuan utilized the very tactics and strategies he had learned from the Burmese during his time as a hostage to defeat 4 separate Burmese invasions of Siam, despite being massively outnumbered. As time and time again, he frustrated the Burmese king's plans to crush the rebellion, have Naresuan killed, and retake control of Siam. With his father's death in 1590, Prince Naresuan took on the mantle of King of Siam. However, despite having already suffered 4 consecutive defeats, the Burmese king was in no mood to relinquish his claims and back down, and at the end of 1592, he authorized a massive 5th and final invasion of Siam to settle the question of sovereignty once and for all. Led by his son, the Burmese crown prince, the Burmese invasion force vastly outnumbered and outgunned the Siamese army, a reality not lost on King Naresuan, who realized that a straight-up head-to-head fight would almost certainly lead to his defeat. In an effort to counter the massive odds stacked against him, King Naresuan ordered a small portion of his forces to carry out a feigned retreat, luring the Burmese into giving chase before springing his trap and ambushing the advancing and out-of-formation Burmese with the bulk of his forces. However, even this successful deception failed to counter the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Burmese, and as the battle progressed, the Thai forces began to waver and fall back. It must have seemed as though Siam was doomed to fall under Burmese domination once again. The drawn-out but ultimately ill-fated rebellion finally brought to a decisive end the long-planned dream of independence and revenge for past wrongs, rapidly slipping through King Naresuan's fingers. Yet, just as all seemed lost, the defiant King Naresuan charged into the midst of the Burmese atop his mighty war elephant, with some accounts suggesting that the now enraged elephant lost control and went berserk, separating the king and a small entourage from the rest of the Siamese army. Surrounded by enemy troops baying for his royal blood, and cut off from his men and any escape route, not only did the battle seem lost, but it was also likely that the king himself would soon be counted amongst the ranks of the dead. However, it was then that King Naresuan spotted the Burmese prince atop his own war elephant nearby. Sensing his golden opportunity to end the battle with one swipe of his blade, he called across the battlefield to his royal rival, mockingly asking him why he was resting under the shade of a tree instead of facing him in single combat like a true leader. Despite the battle being all but won, the Burmese prince gambled his almost certain victory and his life and accepted King Naresuan's challenge, perhaps shamed by his opponent's words and fearful of appearing a coward in front of his watching men. In full view of the surrounding soldiers, the prince and the king charged towards each other on the backs of their tank-like war elephants, exchanging a fierce flurry of thrusts and slices as each man did everything in his power to end the life of his opponent. At the critical moment of the duel, the Burmese prince narrowly missed a wild attack against the Thai king, an error which left him off balance and provided an opening that King Naresuan eagerly exploited as he countered with a savage downward strike that connected with such power that some accounts suggest that the Burmese prince was almost cleaved in half from shoulder to groin. As this royal contest unfolded, incredibly a second duel was also taking place nearby, as King Naresuan's brother fought and bested a Burmese general in yet another elephant duel. At the sight of the king slaying the Burmese prince, the Siamese army rallied and charged into the now shocked and demoralized Burmese, who are said to have broken and fled for their lives, having witnessed their prince so savagely slaughtered. In an incredible reversal of fortunes, the battle had been won by the outnumbered Siamese, who just moments earlier were teetering on the edge of almost certain defeat. King Naresuan's risky duel, repelling the invasion, and finally freeing Siam from Burmese rule. Some historians have disputed the events of that fateful day due to the existence of 10 different accounts of the battle, with a few suggesting that the duel never even took place, and that the Burmese prince was in fact shot and killed by a Portuguese mercenary. However, while the details are disputed and may never be known with certainty, what's undisputed is the battle's impact on the course of Southeast Asian history. With independence finally secured, King Naresuan the Great went on to conquer large swathes of Southeast Asia, including Cambodia, Laos, and even seizing territory from the Burmese. His victory in the elephant duel ultimately freeing Thailand from Burmese domination for the next 2 centuries, and forever securing his place in history as one of Thailand's greatest heroes. I hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.